So, Tuan, would you like me to start now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Governor, for introducing this topic. It's one which has become more and more visible, I think, to everyone who's watching the arrival of ChatGPT, BARD, and other large-scale language models that don't always work the way we expect them to. And it's important in this conversation to recognize that we're really not talking about what's called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. We're really talking about machine learning, which is a narrower kind of intelligence that uses multi-layer neural networks, which were discounted in the 1960s as inadequate, but which clearly over the last decade or even 2 decades have been shown to be extremely powerful in their functionality. However, they are often erratic in terms of their results. And it's the erratic nature of machine learning.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Tuan, did you want to interrupt for a moment?
No. Please continue. Yeah.
So here's the problem we have. We recognize that there are risks associated with the use of machine learning. And I think we might choose to categorize the risks in the same way that self-driving cars or cars with various functionality have been categorized as to risk. Those of you who have been following the self-driving car saga will know that a ranking system has been established. Class 0 is manual only, no assistance whatsoever, humans required to drive the car. And then the next level up, level 1, is called limited assistance. This is where you get warnings. For example, you might have a signal on your rear view mirror that says there's a car in the lane next to you, don't try to change the lane. It's only a signal, it's a warning, but you're in charge of steering the car. Auto braking is another example where the car has the ability to detect that you're approaching the car in front of you faster than the braking system could respond, and so it automatically sounds an alarm and might even auto brake. Partial automation is the next level up, and that's steering, possibly maintaining the car in line, possibly accelerating or decelerating if you are following the car in front of you. The next level they call conditional automation, where the human monitors what the car is doing, but the car might automatically change lanes after you've shown that you want to do so by turning the turn signal on. And high automation is essentially where the car drives itself, but often within a certain geo-fenced area. So as an example, the car might drive itself on a highway, but not in a neighborhood, not in an underground garage. And then finally, full automation, where there is no human intervention required at all. There might not even be a steering wheel, an accelerator, and a brake. So those are the levels of risk factor and functionality that have been defined for self-driving cars. And we might want to consider something like that for the use of machine learning tools. And I don't pretend to try to be as refined as 6 different levels here, but roughly speaking, there might be low risk operation of a machine learning system, for example, to make suggestions to you about what movies you might want to watch or books you might want to read, or maybe writing fiction, which is what ChatGPT seems to be very good at doing. Or maybe image generation. And even in these kinds of applications, we'd want to be careful that the users are fully aware that the system is not to be trusted necessarily, that it doesn't know the difference between that which is considered fact and that which is not. So that would be kind of low risk applications. Moderate risk applications might have to do with recommendations whose acceptance might have risk factors associated with it. One example is things like where you should go for vacation or what hotels you should select, or even flight selection, you probably want to do some double checking to make sure that the advice that you're getting doesn't involve showing up at the wrong airport or getting on the plane at the wrong time. And then the very high risk cases would be any kind of medical diagnosis, recommendation for treatment, automated surgery. And in that particular case, the high risk side, even the things that are not automated, but which are teleporting the actions of a surgeon, as some of you will be familiar with. There's a company called Intuitive Surgical that makes a remote controlled, humanly controlled robot that does laparoscopic surgery. You can just imagine how carefully the software and hardware is analyzed to make sure that it does only what the surgeon is trying to do, doesn't try to take over or perhaps make an incision in the wrong place. And so I would consider those to be very high risk. I'm sure as we learn more and more about how these systems work, we'll be able to refine a kind of risk table in order to determine how much restriction and validation should be placed on systems operating at these different service levels. There are quite a list of challenges that lie ahead, in my opinion. One of them is our inability to predict or anticipate how the system might go off the rails. These systems, as you know, are trained by ingesting huge amounts of input and adjusting the, I would say, the weights and probabilities of, a huge number of pseudo neurons in the multi-layer system. And it's almost mysterious in a way. There are a number of different feedback loops for adjusting the various weights that determine what output comes out as a result of a given input. But it isn't always obvious that we can predict what a particular input will produce in the way of output, even though we might train against a set of materials for image recognition, for example. We do know that sometimes you present an image that it wasn't trained with and it comes out with the wrong conclusion and perhaps the wrong identification. We also are familiar with something called generative adversarial networks. This is where, for example, one system is trying to do image recognition and the other neural network is trying to twiddle a few small pixels in an image to confuse the identification system. And it's quite shocking to discover that a small number of pixel changes can cause the recognition system to fail dramatically. So as an example, I remember one image of a cat was correctly recognized by the image recognition system. 3 pixels were changed. Of course, a human being looking at this doesn't even notice that the pixels were changed, but the system doing the automatic recognition declares it's a fire truck. And the only way to understand such a failure is to appreciate the high dimensionality of these machine learning systems. We're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions or billions of parameters that are part of the system's operation. I would say humans are would find it very difficult to imagine and intuitively understand how something could go wrong. So that's one thing. The second thing that we could worry about is that when we're running these systems, can we tell when they have produced an off-the-rails condition? Those of you who have been reading reports of the ChatGPT will notice that the system has apparently, I don't know this for fact, but it appears to have 2 layers of operation. One of them is the large language model that's been trained in response, but the other one appears to be like an executive function. And when it detects that the output has gone off the rails, it reports that, and it may even essentially claw back its output. And there have been a few examples where not only does it take the output away, but it refuses to admit that it did that, which is pretty hilarious. But the idea here is that you put in another layer of machine learning to detect off the rails condition and then respond to that. Another thing which has been very troublesome is explainability after one of these large language models or other large models has come to a conclusion of one kind or another. And then you ask, why did you come to that conclusion? It's been very hard to explain what the rationale was, because the answer is we trained it on 1 billion pictures and this is the output, end of story. And that's not satisfying for many people. One thing that we, in my opinion, do not know how to do yet is to build model building machine learning systems. And what do I mean by that? Where they speak to large language models and say, well, isn't that a model building system? The answer is yes, that's a model of grammatical and sometimes semantically well-formed sentences or paragraphs. That's a model. But I'm thinking about a system which takes input and builds a logical model of what it is detecting, and then reasons about that model. To give you an example of that, I want you to think about a table for a moment. What is it that makes a table a table? And the answer is, well, it's a flat surface that's perpendicular to the gravitational field. Of course, no one thinks of it that way, but that's the essence of table. And it's a flat surface. Any 2-year-old figures out that if you have something with a flat bottom, you can put it on the table. It will be held up against, falling, and it doesn't roll off the table. And pretty quickly, that 2-year-old also figures out, well, a box could be a table, or a chair could be a table, or my lap could be a table. So this ability to generalize from small numbers of examples and then reason about it is a hallmark of human intelligence. As far as I'm aware, we don't have very good examples of that kind of functionality. We also typically don't have real-time learning. So we train these systems over some period of time with huge amounts of stuff. And then we run them in the application. But what typically does not happen is that the system is getting feedback during its operation in order to learn more, whereas humans typically learn from their mistakes in real time. And the last point is planning, and that's building systems that can take input and make plans and make recommendations. For example, Google Maps or other driving aids take information in and use concurrent information to make recommendations for paths for you to follow. That kind of planning is further advanced in the right kind of context, in well-constrained context. So all of this is to suggest to you that if you think that regulation is needed, you're probably correct. But you might not be correct that we know how to regulate or how to express the regulation. It feels like it is premature to try to assert boundaries that we want to enforce if we don't know how to do that, if we don't know what the mechanisms are to implement the constraints that we're interested in. And just to wrap up, since I'm almost over time here, another thing which is troubling for a lot of people is misinformation and disinformation. And we wish that we could limit the propagation of this kind of non-information, if you like. It's one thing to be entertained. It's something else to be misinformed. And yet it turns out to be very difficult sometimes to discern fact from fiction. And it's the fact that even human beings have trouble doing that suggests that machine learning systems may have as much or more trouble. And so when someone says, well, can't you just train a machine learning system to filter out all the fictitious information that you're getting? And the answer is, we don't know how to do that. At least I certainly don't. So let's be careful about trying to put regulations in place that we don't actually know how to implement. Putting laws together that are unenforceable is generally a very bad idea. Yeah. So, Governor, I'll stop there. And I assume now we have other people to discuss this challenge. But thank you for giving me an opportunity to rant for a little while.
Mike, I think now Sandy Joy already, and Sandy say follow with Vin. Thank you so much, Vin. And I would like to say some word more. This is the first important event of series Boston Global Forum high level dialogues on regulation framework for ChatGPT and AI assistants. We know very noisy now about ChatGPT and very need for something for regulation and framework. And we and Boston Global Forum Michael Dukakis Institute, we do this series event to dialogues and discuss to proposal to governments and United Nations. We will after this dialogues, we will summary and we continue to discuss very much more, and we will finish on April 26th. So this is a very special section and first, and we hope all of us today join with us to discuss more by email and some another section for more detail. And so I think now, Governor, yeah, please. And this year also very special 90th birthday of Governor Michael Dukakis. Yeah, this year we are celebrate and by this series and many events meaningful. And also today on very special day, that is the birthday of Tom Peterson. Professor Tom Peterson, he is a very dear friend, and he is a co-founder of Boston Global Forum. And he joined now. Okay. Yes, very special. Thank you so much for very dear friends and scholars, distinguished scholars join with us today. Very important event for today. So, Mike, please continue. And I think Sandy already ready to talk. Yeah.
Oh, Tuan, can I jump in just for a second? I'm in kind of a waiting room, so I'm going to get off in a second. And I did want to thank all of you for joining this and contributing to all that we do at the Boston Global Forum. What we're talking about today is not something I study, not something I think about closely. I think about it narrowly. My students going to use ChatGPT to write their papers. But I do have one thought. You know, as we discuss these issues, it's very easy to kind of focus on the technology and be thinking hard about, you know, how do we harness the technology? And sometimes we lose a little bit of sight of the larger society of which this is a part. And we don't talk so much these days about the digital divide. That was a hot topic about 20 years ago. We don't talk much about it, but I think there's going to be a substantial AI divide. And I think we need to think hard about the implications for different parts of society of these technological developments. So, but again, I'm in a waiting room, so I'm going to sign out, but I did want to say hi and thank you all for everything you do on behalf of Boston Global Forum. And a special thanks to you, Tuan, for organizing all of this. And Michael, we're going to celebrate your 90th birthday until you're probably sick of hearing us talk about your 90th birthday.
Thank you. Now I think Sandy, please. I saw Sandy join already. Sandy, you are here? Yes, please.
Okay, good. So I spent the last 6 months out at Stanford studying things like ChatGPT, and it's pretty interesting. There's a huge amount of alarm and excitement around it, of course, but I think a lot of that is not so much about the technology, but how easy the interface is. And let me explain what I mean. You know, the internet and Google are really sort of this vision of a universal library that was put forward in the late 40s. And it's taken all that time to sort of get to the point where you can search for anything. It's amazing, right? What ChatGPT does is it's now, instead of the library, it's the librarian that has access to the library. Basically, all it is all the correlations and all the things that are posted online. And what people are doing, because there are these sort of false things in there, is they're trying to curate what it's trained on. So it includes less misinformation, less this, less that, so that its quality goes up. It's like getting rid of the junk in your library, right? But it has no ability to reason at all, right? It can't do syllogisms. It's really that way. You can walk it through that, right? But it really doesn't. It memorizes lots of stuff. The other thing it doesn't have is context. You know, ChatGPT by itself doesn't know what a horse looks like, certainly doesn't know what it feels like. You could add in other information so that it knows what a horse looks like, and some of them have done that. But it doesn't have the richness of experience, and particularly the affordances, the actions. So it's sort of a context-free type of a thing. One of the more unfortunate things it does is it sounds very confident. Its style is written to sound like it knows what it's talking about.
Yeah.
But, you know, to be fair, you know, I always like to compare this to humans. When I talk to like a financial advisor, or frankly, a lot of the sort of, you know, primary care, medical, not to diss them, but they're sounding a lot more confident than they are too. Right? And I'm sure I sound that way to my students. You should do this. Yeah, well, it's actually a little more complicated than that. I am not worried so much about explainability in this case. Things that decide on social benefits, on payments, on crime, things like that, I worry about, because people have to modify their behavior to be able to avoid bad outcomes, and you need explanations for that. There's been good progress being made on that, but we're not there yet. I'd also point out that judges can't explain why they come to their conclusions. There's a lot of intuition in this, and a lot of bias on the human side. So one thinks about regulation, you should be able to show that you're better than the humans. But I think, you know, there is no system that is perfect. And I will suggest some regulation at the end that would capture both the human deciders and the human experts, as well as the AI. The thing that is most interesting to people that I know that are working in this area are, first of all, getting it so that it's not just trained on junk, it's trained on good things, right? Things that are that you could vouch for and so forth. But it really is, in a certain deep sense, senseless. It's just, you know, like when you ask somebody about something they don't know and it just spouts off about it, it's like that. It doesn't have that internal consistency and reference to the real world and consequences. The thing that people are trying to do now, which is really interesting and addresses this digital divide, is there are versions of this that fit on phones. So you don't have to ask Google, you don't have to ask Microsoft. You can have something that is all yours and talks to nobody else, and yet captures most of the information that's on the internet and will tell you what people say, the sort of common sense, about anything you ask it. Common sense is, of course, not always right. Sometimes it's really wrong, and that's a problem we share with people well. But this is an area that's known as perfect secrecy. So if you have the world's library on your person and it's private, then you can ask all sorts of questions without influence from Microsoft or Google or things like that. And so that's an interesting way to think about where this is going. One of the things that I mean, sort of current things are, how do you actually trade information, like for rare diseases? You know, if all my library is different from your library, but yet maybe we share some disease, we'd like to be able to share information. So information sharing on top of having the library is an area of great interest. The regulation that we've sort of come down, I run a legal group also, is that just what Vince said. We don't really understand this well enough to write hard and fast laws, but we need to keep our eyes on it. And to do that, you need to have an audit trail. So a type of regulation that I would fully support is that anything that has an AI in it should keep a record that's easily accessible by anybody of what went in and what went out, so that you can say, oh, look, this is biased against women, or this is making dangerous recommendations, those sorts of things. And that sort of continual analysis of ethical behavior can be put into automatic analysis things, just the way we balance financial books. You can keep running books, basically, that keep track of things. And if something begins to get off whack, then you have humans come in and sort of say, well, here's the evidence of what you've done. The discovery part, which is the expensive part in most court proceedings, is already done for you, and you can begin doing it. So as you can tell, I'm a little more relaxed about this, because I think what it's going to end up with is more like owning this Encyclopedia Britannica, which has errors in it, right? Than some evil overlord, because the one I'm going to have is not going to be owned by Microsoft, sorry, right? Or Google. But we like to look, in my group, we like to look back and sort of ask what happened before. And this is fully comparable, I think, to the moment when printing became very common and people began sharing printed works, typically for short things, but eventually books and so forth. And it's worth remembering that at that time, people were very worried about putting knowledge into the hands of people because it would destroy the culture. And indeed, putting knowledge into the hands of people ended the royalty. The aristocratic class was undermined and eventually deposed because people had knowledge. The same is true of the church. The church used to be an authoritarian ruling entity in Europe, at least, and it no longer, because people all have access to things, right? A slightly less good tale is in the arts. People were very worried in the 1500s about the undermining of art. And indeed, a lot of the traditional forms disappeared. But then the things that reappeared leveraged printing, so novels, stories, printed music, and so forth. And so it's not clear that that we really lost in that trade. And I think that's the moment that we're going to. And the thing that we need to be able to do is to be able to keep track of what's happening so that we can answer questions authoritatively with very little effort. And that means you need to have audit trails, much like you have audit trails for finance, for other sorts of things that are critical infrastructure. There's a couple of hands up. I'm not sure what the protocol is here. So I obviously cause people to either have questions or arguments, which is good, I think.
It's Vince Cerf, just to let you know how to figure out in what order the hands went up. If you click on the lower part of the screen where the little people icons are on the lower right, it'll say 24 on it. If you click on that, it'll open up a list of the people who are on the call, and at the top is the order in which the hands were raised.
Yeah, except that I'm on a new box and I don't have that little button. So.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry about that.
But you put your hand up first, I think.
No, actually, Governor Dukakis has had his hand up for quite a while.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No,
Sean, please.
on the contrary, I
Oh,
haven't
good.
had my hand up, and I don't know why. It seems to be. I'm just sitting here listening.
Okay, well, then we'll ignore your hand. How's that?
Okay.
I would just like to make one observation in response to what Sandy said. I tried an experiment where I said to the ChatGPT, please write an obituary for Vince Cerf. And it produced an obituary that was properly formatted and had the usual style in it. However, it attributed to me things that other people had done, and it attributed to others things that I had done, which led me to believe that even if we had trained the system on purely factual information, because of the way in which the output is constructed word by word, it's capable of conflating facts in misinforming ways. And so
an interesting thing is that there's a little parameter in there that you can tweak. It's called temperature. And so what they did is they decided that the things that it put out, if it were just going to put out things that are sort of exactly right, wasn't a very interesting style. So they throw, seriously, so they throw 10% noise in there. So it probably had something that a good friend of yours did, and it threw it in your box randomly, and then it sort of like riffed on it as if it knew what it was talking about. So that hack of throwing 10% noise in the thing, in the facts, I mean, that's part of the code, right? It's very odd, but that may have a lot to do with some of the things that are not so good. I'm not.
Sandy, the reason that I bring this up, though, is that training it on factual material doesn't help if you toss in this noise factor.
No, I mean, again, it's sort of like a librarian that doesn't know what they're talking about, but sounds very competent, right? Who else wants to? I'm sorry, there's a couple other hands up, and I don't know who went first.
So I think Martha, please, Martha.
This is a great conversation, and there are others here who know so much more than I do. I want to say something about the promise here. If you take, for example, law, there's a possibility of access to law for people who simply don't have it. And I think that there's, as Sandy has been saying, access to knowledge. And but I also want to say, as just an observer of this field, I'm a lawyer and a professor, that the people I know who are deeply into it are very worried. And I have a series of people coming to me and saying, we don't know how to put guardrails around this. This is bigger than any one company. This is bigger than even one large language model, generative model. And the one thing I know for sure is from my field is that law is slow. Law is slow, cumbersome, and the gap in language and expertise may be becoming insurmountable. So I do think that the plan that this group has to identify elements of a framework for regulation is very admirable and good. But I also think that unless there's a plan to also work on self-regulation, guidelines of the people who are today making what one said to me last week, capacities with a capability overhang, that they do not know what the large language model is capable of, and they don't know how to control it. That's what I'm hearing. And so unless there is something that's much faster and in more real time, and also that deals, frankly, with the business models and the incentive structures of the companies that are producing them. And one more thing, the training of the designers so that they have some larger understanding of implications. I think the great promise will not be fulfilled, and some real problems will be underscored. The problems of misinformation are not just some bad stories. The problems are the elimination of trust in any of our institutions or any of our ability to actually verify whether or not the science is true, whether or not the decision announced by a court is the decision announced by a court, whether the election returns are the election returns. Those are the dangers that I am more worried about. I do think that there's great promise of hybrid forms. If there's a human in the loop and making sure that humans have appropriate locations in which they can intercede. But again, people who know much more than I do say, when you give the prompt a third time and a fourth time, you get very different answers. And often they are maybe good, maybe bad, but the ability to tell whether they're good or bad is diminishing. So thanks for including me, and I look forward to hearing what others have to say.
So let me just add to that. So I was actually at a meeting on this in the law school at Harvard last week. And it was the first such meeting because while everybody's talking about it, people aren't getting to do it. And I'm also part of a large project at Stanford, which is, I think, it says they're in the belly of the beast. They're perhaps have been at this a little longer than we have here in Cambridge. And there's real concern, but also real knowledge there about how do you put these things together. And I think that here in Cambridge, we should have a swack at it too. So I'm 100% endorsing what you're saying. Let's see, Shamal, you had your hand up? Am I saying
Yes.
then-
It's Shamwell. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you, Sandy. I admire your optimism, and I think I can trust trust that. As far as the point you made about the audit trail, creating audit trail, what I'm thinking about AI, I think the AI platforms and AI-enabled tools and media have input data. As Win said, there are like zillions of data points that go into these programs. So the input data could far surpass the intelligence and agility of its human creators. That is my concern. And that is the most sophisticated and technologically savvy individual humans looking ahead, sometime ahead from now, who orchestrated the design of AI may not be able to, in real time, implement those guardrails. And that is the concern we have to.
Oops.
I don't.
Shamal, you've been muted. You've muted yourself somehow. There we go. You're
Oh,
back.
I'm sorry. I muted myself. So let me start over.
We just missed the last couple words. Okay.
So you could hear me earlier.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Well, just the
Okay.
last 3 words or something
Okay.
like that. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm glad. So I looking ahead, not what AI and what is happening right now, but looking ahead. I think I want to recapture the point I was trying to make is that the AI will surpass the intelligence and the agility of its human creators, and it will happen at a very rapid pace, and in such that the most sophisticated and technologically savvy individual human who created and orchestrated the design of AI-enabled tools and so on may not be able to keep pace with it, may not be able to implement the guardrails in real time before and the damage could be done that could not be reversed. And
So
yeah.
this is true of human organizations too, or
Yeah.
things happen because we don't have audit trails, which incidentally can be secret, right? But revealed by court order, right? Or other sort of regulatory mechanism. It's incredibly difficult to tell when things are screwing up.
It is. Let's take the example. Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but let's take the example of patient safety, medical errors, adverse events. We talk about transparency, but where is the transparency?
Exactly.
It's very hard to implement. And
So
when AI,
the good thing you see here is in finance, they've made real progress at this, where you have computers watching the billions of purchases and transfers and so forth in order to find money laundering and fraud. And so it's arguably the most important thing in that area because it finds 95% of all of it. Doesn't find all of it, right? And so forth. But yeah, it seems to be a battle. Ruth has been waiting for a while. I just don't want to point out that everybody. Yeah.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join this conversation, and thank you, Sandy and Vint. Just a couple of things to throw into our discussion. So I teach intellectual property law, so I'm a copyright and patent, trademark, trade secret person. So I want to echo Martha's points about the business models, which are all built around property and quasi-property rights, both in the data and in the outputs. And some of you may be aware that just last week, the US Copyright Office finally, without much explanation, agreed to register a work generated by AI. What it did, to Shamal's point, and I think Vint made this point as well in his remarks, the office decided to distinguish between the works that were created by, the dimensions of the work created by the human author and that which was generated by ChatGPT. Recognizing copyright in those dimensions of human authored works and not in the ChatGPT. Now, how they drew that line and how they drew that distinction is extremely problematic. But the point is that the rapidity with which this shift has occurred is startling. And the consequences on the business models suggest that we are already having this conversation in some ways where there's a lag between what we are discussing now and what the agencies that regulate some of these outputs are already doing. I second Sandy's point about audit trails. I want to suggest a couple of other things in the regulatory sort of mixing bowl that we're discussing this morning. The first might be what I call a disclosure regime. One of the challenges is we don't know where the data is mined. And so I would say that we should not wait until the output is already there. We ought to have some sort of a data trust system in which those who are generating the outputs are forced to disclose. I think that's crucial. It's particularly crucial when we have the potential, as we do, Sandy, to your point, of hardwiring the outputs into the way humans behave. So, there's a lot of concern about how we rely on ChatGPT and the accuracy and the trust. But one of the great challenges with misinformation is that misinformation doesn't stay static, right? It actually begins to affect the way humans themselves process and make decisions, and our sense of intuition, and even our sense of ethics. And so my view is that we need toll gates, and we need more than one toll gate. And some of those toll gates, so the audit trails, perhaps after we have an output, or as the output is being created, disclosure on our way through. I think we also need to have some consideration of zones where AI ought not to have the presumption of access. And they may be limited zones. And this is a very common move in law, where we simply have bright line rules that exclude particular domains. As a patent lawyer, if you create some technology involving nuclear, with nuclear capacity or nuclear devices, you may get the property, right? But you can do nothing with it. It's immediately by statute excluded from the marketplace without further sort of human intervention deciding when and where you can use it. So I do think the possibility of zones of exclusion ought to be on the table. And we may decide that that's in the medical applications or with national security implications. I mean, we may quibble about where, but I think there ought to be such a zone. We should not proceed on the assumption that AI applications should just be allowed to roam freely in the commons, grab whatever it can, and then release it. last point about globalization. Much of the rest of the world is extremely anxious about the influence of AI applications in US foreign policy and in the kind of information that gets produced, because the rate of error, while low, the possibility of correction is extremely sticky. Right? This is the same problem we have with misinformation. So I don't know if Martha is still on the call, but I thought it was really interesting. ChatGPT was asked minority law professors in the country, and Martha Minow was listed on the list of minority law professors, professors of color. So it tells us, and in fact, what's interesting about it is there was no professor of color listed on the list of the greatest minority law professors. It tells us, to Vince's point, that we're dealing, and I don't know if that's the noise, Sandy, that was thrown in, but the choice about what noise gets thrown in is itself deeply problematic because of the architecture that gets built. And we have to think about the ways of regulating that shape outcome, not just letting the outcome be the selection of the designers without any constraints.
To me, one of the things, I love all the things that you're saying, first of all. One of the things about this last example is that, this is trained retrospectively. So the attitudes that are reflected in ChatGPT are the attitudes of 2017, 2015, earlier, and society changes. And some of the things that it would regard as common sense are no longer common sense because we've grown up in some way, right? Tuan, do you want, I can call, Margaret has her hand up, and Nam and Am has his hand up.
I think
I don't feel like I should moderate all this.
Yes, I think now is a good time for Natalie to talk. Natalie talk. So then we continue discuss. Natalie talk about some concept notes for regulation framework. We think and we will discuss from today. Yeah. So Natalie, I think.
Well, thank you. What I'd like to do is to just raise some questions, pull together some of the things that you said, and raise some questions to consider. And but as an introduction, let me remind you that at least 53 countries have some kind of, not regulation, position, guideline, whatever it is, about AI in general. I can't be more specific. We have all the data, the EU put it together, and we expanded it. So somehow this conversation is moving into the public sphere, governmental sphere, maybe faster than we thought it might. Second point is, my own sense is that we should clarify some things, some anchors in our discussion before we move directly to the regulatory perspective. And I'm not telling you anything that you haven't heard already, but what I'd like to do is to ask us to think about, if we use the word regulate, however broadly we might want to think about that, is regulate what? What is the what that should be regulated? And I bet you if we went around the group here, we might have very different answers to that. The second related to this is, do you want to regulate the use of data, or the method used, or the viability of the data, etc.? And we can go down the what is that we want to do. Most of us like to use the word accountability. And in Tuan's remarks and comments about the thinking in the Boston Global Forum, accountability plays a big role. The puzzle is accountability to what, about what, over what, when. So all these elements that have to be articulated around just accountability. Most of us would think that accountability, more or less like motherhood, is a good thing, give or take. Okay, so. And I'm not trying to wordsmith here. What I'm trying to do is to try to move away from the concepts that we find comfortable. But if we begin to act on any dimensions, we have to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more explicit. the other thing that concerns me a little bit, concerns you a little bit, is mechanism. How? If we're thinking of regulate, big concept, and let's assume that we think it's a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea now to move to regulation, but that's a different conversation. Is it guidelines? How, the mechanism? Is it guidelines? Is it standards? Standards would be a good thing to do in general. Is it alternative legal forms that are in existence now that we can import or consider seriously? And there's been some discussion about it. Or about user pressure. We regulate via user pressure. I'm not quite sure mechanically how we do this. Where do incentives play in this thing? And remember, in the background is a general consensus that we don't want to prevent technological change. We don't want to impede the advances of modes of changes in tools, techniques, etc. What we're concerned with is more aligning principles we have. Accountability could be one of them. Addressing bias could be another one, and so on. So that we have a conversation that is holistic, as opposed to really broken in different little cubicles that don't talk across to each other. The issue of corporate responsibility, really the big elephant in the room, with apologies to Vint, really I apologize for that analogy, is the business community and the corporations. I mean, those that make and run and push the frontiers, the big ones and the little ones. So they are essential players in this conversation. There is also the question of how, with respect to, do we parse it by the problem we see? Do we parse how we manage this by the process we see? And we all know that what is informing the uses of the development and the uses of the technology is data in the past. So we take that for granted. That's the way the world is. That's the way the technology moves, etc., etc. What do we do about the built-in? I won't use the word bias, but it is a form of bias. And what I've learned many examples today that I wasn't aware of, that kind of enrich the complexity of the things that we have to deal with. So let's backtrack. If we're talking about regulation writ large in approaching the phenomenon from an international community perspective, up to wherever it goes, we're really talking about having to deal with shared values, common objectives, and common aversions. Now, I don't think we have, we may have common objective goals, but I'm not certain in this domain, because goals are defined by the actor, the action, the outcome, the interest, etc. And then common aversions. We probably have common aversions in principle, or as they bear on what does this result affect? How does it affect me, my students, etc. But really taking stock of the landscape of regulation, the tools we know, and also taking into account the potential trajectories that we see happening in the technologies. Let's use a ChatGPT for a moment, and eventual conflict that we've already seen with established norms, where it's copyright or whatever. My own sense of the challenge is that we may be running into the technology issues are moving us rapidly in collision with established practices, even established legal practices. And the time factor, law moves slowly, guidelines move slowly, but not as slow as law. Standards also move slowly, but not as slow as law. The technology and the issues we have to deal with are moving very, very fast. So where are the commonalities in the how we manage just this conversation? this is not the framing that Tuan had asked me to share with you, but I've learned a lot in this conversation, and we need a few more rounds to get at beginning to address or answer the set of issues or questions that I've come up with from what you've said. The only thing I've done is organize them into what, into how, etc. And voila, that's about as much as I'd like to share with you at the moment.
If I could jump in just to add a footnote to Nazli's really, I think, insightful capturing of this. Let me say that we should not think of law as statute and legislation and things that get issued by Congress or the state legislature. There are many modalities of legal regulation that don't come from Congress or from the legislative branch, and including technical regulation, right? We have many examples, certainly in the intellectual property field, in the technology field, of, and in fact, think of radio. Like radio has self-regulated for as long as its existence in terms of both the way it's organized, its content, and what gets freely aired and what doesn't. The movie industry rates itself from PG to rated X, right? They're all forms of regulation that I think we should not limit ourselves in thinking about next steps or what the regulatory framework ought to be. We certainly shouldn't limit ourselves simply to what the legislature is willing and has the capacity to do.
Let me answer that, because this is really an important point, and you're absolutely right. And I regret for having used it in a restrictive way. But the context here that I was asked to speak to is at the international level, where the only, but also your point is quite right about the technical regulations, the voluntary regulations, etc., that come out of the system. In fact, the entire internet in the old days and now again is managed by the private sector, by a set of rules. But if we're talking about an evolving global consensus, we have to recognize that we cannot bypass the structure of the state. I don't like that, but it's a fact of life.
Yes, I think now, David, you have some, you raise a hand first. Yeah.
Thank you, Tuan. So this is an important conversation and really enlightening on a lot of levels. And this whole issue of regulation, understanding, evolution of the technology, all converges. I come at things as a neurologist, psychiatrist, and behavioral neuroscientist. And so the things that interest me are all of the things that all of you have wisely said. Also things like, if it is potential at any point for there to be more or different kinds of cognitive capacity or awareness in the future or not. But the things that worry me have to do with, in addition to regulating for moral purposes, the AI developments that we've been talking about. What I worry about are the immoral humans directing it, who in fact do not listen to purposefully any regulations, and may in fact in secret or with power be bad actors, and whether they be authoritarian governments or individuals or groups of individuals with nefarious agendas, their capacity to disrupt in all the ways that we've been talking about, informationally, but even more concerningly, surveillance and control and manipulation are the things that I really worry about. So that at the same time as coming up with, when appropriate, as appropriate, mechanisms of accountability, of auditing, of oversight, of regulation. I have a lot of concerns about and hope that there's attention also directed towards how to address the bad actors and the purposeful nefarious use of these increased capacities, which, as we've talked about, have tremendous ability to disrupt and manipulate.
Thank David. And I think now we would like to hear from Zlatko, former Prime Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina. He is a great contributor and Boston Thinkers, the Boston Global Forum. Zlatko. So then we continue discuss, and I would like to learn from Carolina and from Stanford, Professor also. Yes, and we are of us here will have chance to discuss and speak as much as possible today. Yes, now I think Zlatko, you are here.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, great, excellent. I was kind of, always have a problem to figure out, is my mic on, and I may be causing some trouble. So that's the reason why most of the time when I start speaking, it's useless, because my mic is mostly off. Anyway, so thank you very much, Tuan, and all the good friends, that I familiar faces I see here. Great topic, great discussion as always. And I did a lot of notes, while listening to you, friends, so far. But now, speaking about regulation, I will just remind us of a few things. Last time when I was having discussion in a similar setting, we were discussing about this Global Alliance for Digital Governance. And we were talking about regulating the things. There are a few questions that are inevitable to sort out before we do proceed further on. The document that you circulated to us in front of this event is really good one and good starting point to do something. To roll out the things, especially having in mind that we have enough time, or maybe not having enough time if we want to do something announcing a little bit more serious on April 26th, when that gathering will be. But I just want to remind you, because there were discussions in here, Vince said one very interesting thing on the very beginning by saying, we have to have in mind that we should not regulate the things if we don't know how to do it, and if we cannot do it. So I think that few questions we have to define as a preconditions for further discussion is, first, why we don't want to regulate. Why? And that will probably be the easy question. But then the second question is, what do we want to regulate? And then after we figure out how we want to regulate, we have to see who would be the regulating the thing. So I see three dimensions for the beginning. First one is dimension of who would be regulating that. For the beginning, on what level? Are we going to have regulations that the business community is doing? They will be doing it for itself. Shall we have some? One dimension is, for example, business community regulation. The second one is nation state regulation. Because we have some attempts, as you do know better, some of you mentioned already in the United States, you have, Nasli was mentioning the countries which are trying to regulate. But at the same time, we also have the third layer, business, nation, and the third one is let's call it regional regulation. Regional regulation is maybe the best example is the European Union. There's a lot of discussions going under the umbrella of European Union institutions lately about artificial intelligence, about regulating certain issues about artificial intelligence. Just to give you idea, a few days ago, I had a very interesting conversation about what's happening in France. And for example, there is recently French minister, he has a minister for digital affairs. Just a week ago, he asked French so-called National Committee for Digital Ethics to give him opinion on ethical issues that are actually raising up by automated text generation systems, especially having in mind exactly the topics that we are discussing about. As a matter of fact, they told him that by June 30th, they will give him a first draft of reply, on his question. So after regional thing, we have to, right now there is something called the AI Act that was adopted by your parliament that is suggesting that in the latest amendment to the AI Act, there is already hinted that AI systems such as, I quote, ChatGPT should be classified as high risk. So, you know, when European bureaucracy starts structuring something and starts tackling it, it may go in wild, not west, but wild directions. And it can do a lot of it because we all know that the principle of regulations, the way I see it, is among there are a lot of things we want to, but one thing is how to, let's say, provide privacy.
Be here for a while.
And the second aspect is how
down,
not
get
to
yourself some
block
breakfast.
innovation. Because what we do is sometimes when we start to regulate the things, we're actually blocking innovation as innovation itself. So we have to be very cautious by tackling these and making some kind of balance in between privacy and not. So I'm just saying that in Europe right now, there are a lot of things that are going on. Having said so, I think that the next, if one in that dimension of who is doing it, business community is doing, national regulators, regional regulators, and finally global ones. What do we do? Are we supposed to at least tackle or name some issues or some needs for global regulation? Because right now we have that in China, they're regulating these things the Chinese way. So, I mean, and having said so, I think that we are entering into very messy area in which it will be very hard to expect that we can do something on a global level. Going back to the first thing I mentioned is, basically speaking, this idea of Global Alliance for Digital Government. I just want to remind you that we defined those 4 pillars that we said that we have to talk about how those 4 pillars that are representing liberal democracies, how we can do some common ground among them, which is European Union, which is United States, which is, as we said, Japan and India. And then we're talking about some other players over there from Great Britain, Australia, and some other countries, but we're talking about how we should maybe tackle or open the debate about, do we want to try to do some debate on, let's call it, on those putting together those 4 pillars and the joining. For example, one of those pillars is European Union. And now when the European Union is talking about it, I'm interested, and we are talking about a lot of time, that we should not have European Union regulation, but we should have European regulation of willing Europeans. When I'm saying European, I mean, would Ukraine tomorrow wants to do it? Would Moldova wants to be part of it? Would we have a Western Balkan be part of it? Would we have some other countries that are, let's say, inclining to European Union? We have neighborhood policy of European Union? So maybe this is the area where we can have European Union being replaced by European pillar in this area. Maybe this is something that we should think how we can. And my last point is at this stage is what are the things that we are regulating? I think there are 2 options, so to speak, 2 areas briefly. One is commercial use, regulating commercial use. And second one is, let's call it, as some people are saying, malicious use. Will we regulate potential malicious use? Under malicious, we can define what it is. And the third element is commercial, malicious, and something which is pillar itself, which is legal and ethical risks. Are we going to try to regulate those legal and ethical risks associated along the elements, along the, I don't want to say products, concepts like ChatGPT. When I'm saying this, I'm talking about 4 basic, which in European Union and European debates right now, when they're talking about legal and ethical risks associated with the use of ChatGPT, they're talking about data privacy risk regulation, about liability risk regulation, about intellectual property risk regulation, and finally, ethical issues. So I think that it would be wise that we see how we can, let's say, consolidate this basic playground that we are talking about. What do we do? Who does it? Not who can do it now, because right now the global geopolitical multilateral system under complete restructuring, and we cannot talk about ideal format. But I think that it would be good that we put that in a context of this 4 pillars when we talk about multilateralism, and then 4 pillars could proceed on the level of global regulation, having in mind that we figure out what do we want to do, how to do it, and what are the measures. So I'll stop in here. Very interesting discussion. I think we just opened the lid a little bit, and the steam is getting out. But I think it's wise that we see how we can a little bit more cautiously be opening that lid and see what do we want to have in the pot. Thank you.
Thank you, Zlatko. I think Caroline from Amsterdam.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you for inviting me, Twan. Very interesting conversation. I'm very happy to be here. Yeah, I think the GDPR is very interesting as an example of what happened. So for a long time, the big companies didn't want the GDPR to succeed. But after 30 years, in the end, Europe adopted GDPR. And what you see now is that GDPR became really an asset for the European Union, for the business in Europe, but also a lot of American companies are now complying to GDPR. So here you see that GDPR, it took a long time, actually supports democracy, supports the development of a balanced market. And when I think about AI, and there's a lot of activity around AI in Amsterdam, and we spend a lot of time also on legislation, we realize that we need to make this legislation and we need to make safe havens. So now you can say, let it just go anywhere, take over any commons, like Ruth was saying. I think we really don't want that, because we are a democracy. So the unity of body and soul is, for example, really fundamental to our law system, to how we have a constitutional state. And I think we should develop such criteria, whether you call it regulations or laws, or whether you fence certain areas. It has to be rooted in the constitutional law of our countries. It's not so that technology can just fake all that away. That happened a lot with privacy in the beginning, and we are all very happy that we got it back in a certain way. And in Europe, we got more privacy now than you have in the United States, or in China, there's no privacy whatsoever. So different countries have different balances. But I think we need to do the same with AI. I mean, we feel very strongly about it. It has to be regulated, and also it has to be regulated soon. And then there can be a choice made to say that AI can only be present in those areas. So they cannot work in anything that has to do with children. They cannot do in anything that can lead to use for crime. So you can exclude areas of life, just for now, to give time to make the legislation. In Amsterdam, we were run over by a very funny example, by the dark stores, we call it. So the people who bring food, and in a few months, Amsterdam streets were taken over by people on bikes who bought street shops to store their goods, and it was closed. So streets went down in value, in experience, and the bike people, the companies took over. Then the council decided, for now, no more companies like that until we know how to regulate it. So it's perfectly fine as a mother of a household or as a mayor of a city that you say, we don't know how to regulate it well. This is so risky that we're just going to wait. And yes, please, ChatGPT, you play, but you're not allowed into all these other areas till we know how to regulate. And I think there's so much at stake that we need to go to measures that far, because we don't want to undermine our own, it took generations to get to the democracies that we have now. We don't want to throw it overboard because the company can earn money. It's a bad reasoning. We have to protect our living ecosystem. So that would be my plea, to focus where we can have it. And maybe for climate change, it can be great. I know many areas where we can use it with no danger at all. But other areas, please, not at all. So I think we need to protect democracy, really, here. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret from Stanford. Yes.
Yes, hi. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of both a lawyer and a designer, my backgrounds. So I'm really interested in the practical development of both the AI and the regulation at the same time. And I think back to not so long ago as search engines, the other broker of information to the public that people take with a lot of authority, a lot of trust, maybe even more so than their government authorities. People go to Google or they go to Siri or they go to Alexa to know what to think about a certain thing or what their rights are. There we saw so much of it based on industry self-regulation. And I think we can learn from that recent experience for this future of other public-facing AI systems like a ChatGPT or something else that the general public is using. Because what we saw with what happened with that self-regulation and search engines is that some domain experts, some professional communities got very organized and were able to insert their expertise into product teams at Google or Bing or Apple. So see the medical community, and with the Mayo Clinic or the American Medical Association, really going to those private tech platforms and organizing a clear list of harms and of strategies to make sure that when people search, hopefully they're getting reliable information and that there's a lot of guardrails and hoops and other kind of context being given. Those product teams sitting in Mountain View or Cupertino or Seattle don't have that domain expertise, whether it's around medicine and health information, voting and elections, immigrations, and all kinds of other very important public policy and public services information. And so what we see is that if a community like the medical community, or a little bit late to the game, the voting and elections community, are able to self-organize and then essentially try to find a senior VP or another team at one of these tech companies, they may be able to exert really robust standards and good interfaces, good disclosure, good technical interventions. But if a community doesn't do that self-organizing, like I would say our legal community, our justice community has not done that very well. So if you go and search Google, I'm facing eviction, what should I do? Most likely I, sitting in California, will get information for Portland, Maine. I'll follow that and completely lose my rights and my house. Because our community has not done that advocacy, has not instructed these product teams about what the risks and harms are and how to customize or put guardrails up around their algorithms, around how they show things on search. So I think echoing back to Martha Minnow's points earlier, now is the time that many of these product teams are setting up their structures, deciding internally what zones are of get special treatment. So most likely they're going to inherit what they've already learned from search engines, that medical and health, high importance. Let's put a lot of labor and domain expertise into that. Maybe also election and voting, other things they get called out for the press on. Let's put a lot of information on that. But there's so many other public services and public policy topics that are going to, again, not be given priority. And those product teams have no idea what the risks, harms, and opportunities are. So this is kind of a call to really focus on this moment as a chance to prospectively, hopefully, think about that kind of organization or influence to make sure that those product teams, as they're gathering data, reviewing data, setting up the interfaces, that they have people with all of this lived experience, or as well as the elites in these spaces, to really set up kind of the guardrails and the risks and harm profiles, so that they're not kind of making an engineer's kind of like, oh, this is important for immigration. Let's, this seems right. Let's trust that. So there's just a lot of work that needs to be happen as all of this gasoline is put on the fire of public facing AI. And the only other point I'd really like to make is really thinking about participatory, community-driven regulation and really paying attention to how things will play out for that normal average person, especially from more vulnerable backgrounds, who is now having AI either make decisions about them or expected to use AI in their own decision making. And I love GDPR. I think the data privacy protections are great, but we can also learn from some of the regulatory fails there. I'm sure many of you, as you're browsing the internet, have to click away cookie banners, all of these over disclosures, all of these kind of false interfaces that supposedly get people's meaningful consent, but really are just kind of interfaces that get in people's way, that people are not reading, they're not empowered by. So as we think about a new regime that's supposed to be empowering people to make informed choices about how AI treats them, we know that that just puts a lot more burden on normal people. And how can we design those disclosures, that explainability, those self-protections that are not just more burdens on a person and more likely that people will just swat away and say, get out of my way, I'm here to do this other thing. So we have to be really smart in how we design proactive and prospective protections that are not just constantly trying to educate people or overburdening them. So those are my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Great voice and comment and view from Stanford. Also, we would like to learn more from Silicon Valley. Mr. Bảo Trần, yeah.
Well, good morning, everybody. Yes, thank you, Tuấn. So from my perspective, I agree with all the issues raised in the legal side of it. I think it's very interesting in the way ChatGPT is trained. It can be one-sided. And so, for example, if you were looking up in certain areas where they have rent control, the tool basically provides the renters one-sided set of information. It's all favoring the renters, and in that case, I think it does its public good. However, when if you happen to be a landlord and you use ChatGPT for that, I think it's going to be problematic because the training data is based so much is a one-sided set of training data. So I do think there are risks involved with in terms of ability to hack the system. So what you can do is train the system or provide data that's one-sided, and of course the system will then spit back that information. And I can see perhaps in an election scenario that you may be able to provide data to it, and if it's not properly filtered, it will start spewing out fake data. So that I think is a very interesting issue. And I'd like to take the opportunity here to present a very quick demo of how AI is actually used as a collaborative way to help people do useful things. Because I think the discussion that we have up to date is very high level, and it really doesn't show the way that perhaps it's being used in various startups in specific tasks. The major task that we see AI is being used for is for customer service, where it can quickly improve answers and responses to a particular how to use a product, for example. And it can also be used to accelerate the generation of complex documents. And so if I may, Tuấn, I will like to share screen and show people how AI is utilized to improve a particular user, and in this case, a professional user, a lawyer, not a general public. And so in that way, the context is very constrained, and I'll show you that. So if I may, I'll share my screen, and I will show you how we do this. So what we have is basically a system to help inventors as well as lawyers to generate a complex document. We call that a patent application. So I have previously asked to see if there's anybody who suggests a new idea they might want to try, but I'll show you. But since we have no idea suggested, I'll just make one up just to save time. So let's say a new flying car that uses hydrogen fuel, let's say. So we would say that as a title. And so this is the title. Based on the title, then what you can do is you can ask it to help you put in a background of why you need this. So so we're basically doing what is called prompt engineering. We are guiding the generative AI to generate text along the way that we want it. And so now it's generating the background for the invention. We can ask it to suggest potentially a summary of the invention, all based on the title. And of course, you know, we're giving it very sparse information, but in a real case, you would actually put in what you have invented. And then the system will also suggest advantages of your invention for you. So basically, that's the first part of that. Then based on your summary, the system can automatically generate the claims for you. And this is something that, let's see. I think there's a slight documentation. So if we jump out and we jump back in, you'll see the two sets of claim. Oh, there it is. It's generating it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's able to generate a set of claim, which traditionally is in the domain of a lawyer, normally not a domain of an individual. So here we can prompt it to ask an image. We're just going to upload some arbitrary image, let's say, and we can generate flowchart automatically from the claim. And that's that. And so all you have to do is annotate the image. Let's say 1, 2, 3 is a car. Let's just say.
Yes, but could you shorter, because we would like to get for more opinion from
others. Yeah.
So please brief, and we will introduce you later. Yes, and later.
Right. So basically, you can see now how we're guiding the system to generate a complicated document, and so that's pretty much about it. And this is a tool that we call it engineered software. But basically, people don't think of the legal industry as using computer-aided technology, but this is an example of how we use AI to generate a pretty complicated document very quickly. And that's about it. And then I guess we can, you know, save this demo for discussions afterward. But yeah, go ahead, Tuấn.
Yeah, thank you, Bảo. And I think Nam Phạm, he is former Assistant Secretary of Massachusetts. Nam, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You are unmute. Please unmute Nam.
Yes, I'm sorry that. Good morning and thank you, Tuấn. I used to work as a bureaucrat, and I just share with you at our forum that when I hear the word regulation, it's just like music to my ear. However, whenever we talk about regulation, the next question we ask is the compliances, the enforceability of the regulation, and I think many of our speakers have mentioned about that. And number two is regulation usually is very slow, and technology is moving very, very fast. I remember 5 years ago, I had a discussion with a Boston University professor. We talk about regulation for fintech, for digital currencies, to prevent the problems that we've seen with Bitcoin and other guys the last few months. Well, we haven't had any regulation yet regarding fintech, whether it's federal or state. So I think regulation is very hard to combine in time. We would look backward more than forward. And I believe that the best role for us over here is to set up an overall global digital framework the way that the former Prime Minister had mentioned. AI is just one invention. Before AI, we had something we call the internet. And at that time, people also talking about how we can regulate the internet. We cannot. After AI, there may be other things that will come up and will change the world again. So I think the Boston Global Forum has set up a very, very good umbrella framework regarding how should we deal with all of the technology innovation. The number one goal is to ensure that it will serve people, not the other ways. And I think we can build up some overall framework, and we push that to our, I guess, leaders across the world, so they can suggest some regulation and some compliance down the road. But it's hard to have a regulation for every potential innovation down the road. Number two is from the practicality perspective. One of the things that we've been discussing over the last many years is Ukraine, as well as the threat of dictators like Mr. Xi, Mr. Putin. So I just wonder if any of us have asked ChatGPT the question, what is the solution? What is the best solution to deal with Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi, and to see what kind of answers we may have. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nam. And Francisco, yeah, from Rome, yeah.
Right. So this was a really interesting conversation. So much emerged from this. Let me just give you one background for a second. So I've been one of the beta testers of ChatGPT for the past 2 years, for over 2 years, right? And I also happen to have been the technical editor for the IEEE for the P7006, which is the standard for personal AI agents. So the IEEE has been for a number of years trying to come up with a standard to regulate AI agents and assistants, basically, no? And in that capacity, I've been working for several dozens people, mostly engineers, and trying to negotiate between the humanists and the legal scholars that on one side said they had to regulate, and on the other side, the engineers that have been adamant about the bias that technology is neutral. They really struggled to understand their own position as actor in an ethical conundrum, in an ethical question. Now, one thing that is important about all AI agents as an overarching theme is that I think the entire world understands that it's a high-risk technology that is characterized by very high potential, but also very high risks. I think that the experience we had with the fossil fuels, for example, or the internet, is educating us to understand that when you're in front of general purpose technologies that are going to reshape society, we have to be very careful in making decisions that will have a long tail, a very long series of consequences, because once you design a system around a specific technology, the consequences are going to be very long lasting. So I think the reason why there's this concern about regulation, which is unprecedented if you think about the history of technology, regulation has been always late to the field or to the action, but this time around, I would say, it's been moving faster than usual. Well, the past 2 years somehow have prepared me to what is happening with ChatGPT, because I've been using it for a while, and I started to have those reflections. And now the world seems to be drunk with ChatGPT. I mean, suddenly everybody is realizing. And I would frame it in a bigger context of AI assistance. We are going to move into a society where there's going to be many competing AIs. I mean, ChatGPT is only one. Obviously, we are already seeing the economic impact of some and the popularity of the tool, and it means that the entire innovation system is going to reconfigure itself, investing even more in artificial intelligence. I mean, it was already started as a process. I think that the need for regulation is incredibly important. I think that we need to accelerate that process, because although on one side is true, what is one of the axioms of innovation is that you cannot limit innovations because you would put yourself at a disadvantage. I don't think that really applies to artificial intelligence being defined as an high risk. It means that social innovation, which is legal innovation, because legal innovation is a form of social innovation. I mean, there isn't only technological innovation, there's also social innovation. Great things have been done without technology by humans changing their own society and changing their own systems, the democratic system, the way of voting. I mean, those are all social innovations that have been very consequential for humanity. So I think it's the time to understand and learn that social innovation and technical innovation cannot be separated anymore. So call it governance, call it regulation, call it whatever you want. But the reality is that it's the focus on putting governance at the same level of technological innovation and leading technological innovation is fundamental, because don't forget, technology is there to solve human problems. Technology needs to be created, and innovation needs to be defined by one scope: solving human problems for everybody, not just for a limited minority, but for the entire world. So I'm all for regulation, because I see what I tell to engineers is, you're smart people. I'll tell you to solve a problem, and I give you some limitations. The smarter ones are going to create very smart systems that abide by that game. If I give you a chess game or another game, you will play by that game, and the smart people will emerge within that game. So it's very important for me, the focus on regulation and to stop the bias of thinking that innovation will be limited by regulation. Is not. It's just going to move in a different direction, and that we want to guide that different direction. I have practical recommendations. First of all, there's going to be bad actors. So, I mean, I'm reminded of the Leviathan. We are at war with ourselves. Humans are really capable of amazing things and really bad things. And what the Leviathan tells us is that we need a police, we need regulation, we need someone that controls. So what will happen is that we're going to define and design AI systems that are going to police other AI systems. So the first thing to do is part of the governments should invest in procurement of AI systems that are there to regulate private AI systems. That's one way of understanding. You cannot have a human to compete with an AI system, but you can design AI systems that can interpret AI content and that can interact with AI content and control AI content. That was very much what the IEEE P7006 standard on AI agents was. The other one is that as humans, we're going to interact more and more with machines that are outpacing us in many ways. Well, we want AI systems that represent our values. We want an AI system that represents me and my values, so that when I'm interacting with another AI system, that AI system is informed and regulated in the interaction with me. So practical recommendation is to put the focus on technical standards, because these technical standards will in the end lead the dominant AI systems, because there's a natural competition, and this competition is fed by innovation processes, access to infrastructure, access to education. It's not that easy to invent AI that are not embedded in a complex system, right? I would go so far as to say that, for example, any programmer that is working in companies, in societies that treasure democracy and the protection of the individual and human rights, well, they should have a license to program AI systems. That license will guarantee that whoever is programming will be informed about ethical considerations, ethical applications, and that license should be renewed every 2 or 3 years, like many other licenses in other risky jobs. There would be immediately one way of enforcing regulation. If you create an international license, it might start in Europe and in the States, but it will create a better standard, for example. The same will be, for example, with the standard organizations, which should be totally involved, because a lot of these elements cannot be understood by the legislator, but the tech community should be engaged in doing that. I'm actually collaborating with the managing director of the IEEE and with the president of Mozilla to do specifically some documents about the role of standards and how they should be kind of interacting with the legal frameworks. So all I'm saying, I don't want to take too much time, but all I'm saying is that there's a lot we can do, and perhaps the first thing to be like vocal about is to be able to explicit the fact that governance is not seen as a form of limitation to innovation. In response to Margaret, for example, no? I just want to say it's true that what you're saying, that GDPR is very cumbersome and problematic. I was involved in it. Actually, I was in the community in Brussels when we were still seen as the
recent emails. Once you turn on night permissions, you can let me know how you'd like to handle it.
Sorry, there's some background noise. Yeah, all I'm saying is that when you get all these screens, when you have to accept cookies and whatnot, it's true that they're very cumbersome. It's true they're sometimes meaningless, but they're a reminder of some rights that you have. So every time that you get that one, probably you're going to press yes or allow them all simply because it's the simplest solution. But they are a little bit of a reminder of a set of rights that you have. And it's a little bit like the police. Normally, you might be very critical of them until you need them. And that's a little bit the story of these banners. They're there to inform you when needed, right? It's not perfect, but it's a form of communication, no? I could continue, but thank you. I mean, it was just a...
Yeah, thank you so much. And I don't know, Paul Nemis, stay here or not. Yeah, I think maybe Paul left. And I think Simon, she raised her hand. Yep, you can.
Thank you.
You want? Yeah, this guy.
I think this is an excellent dialogue, and I'm just thinking about how these would be incorporated into this framework that we would create, or we are creating. I want to pick up on a couple of points that were raised. First, Nazli's point about regulate what, regulate how. And I think we have to think about this from the systems perspective. So all the different components. And then, so regulate what? So what are the different components that are within this system, in this universe, AI universe, and that is related to our lives as individuals, as nations, as regions. And then that would guide regulate how. So this is something that that's a longer conversation, but I do want to recognize those 2 points and emphasize that we can think from the systems perspective, and so that it's not, we don't end up with either or, but a very comprehensive framework. Another thing I want to touch on is what Margaret mentioned, having domain experts. They're being organized and providing input into how things are designed. That's an excellent point. Having participatory action. and community building and so on. Having the input from different communities is extremely important, because they are the subject matter experts, as one would say. The other point is self-regulation. I do want to also share the thought that regulation is more reactive. We should also think about proactive. And that's where the design, what is designed, how it's designed, comes into play. Not that it's static; it's already happening, but we can engage in that as we move forward with this technology, and engage that community of I would say, let's say, the world Silicon Valley, to be responsible, to be accountable, to make sure that the technology is designed for humans and with human values that we all embrace. The self-regulation part is extremely important, and then also have the standards, so that when things go awry, they can be addressed. So those are some of the things, some of the points I had, and I would say also that this is the risk, as much as the potential, the risk is also very great, to especially to democracy, and how AI is the new frontier in the international relations that calls for a new, let's say, post-nuclear global order. And so we have to have something similar has been said. I don't really have the words on my mind, but like-minded states embracing a shared framework for AI governance, as well as a pact for strategic deterrence of misuse by rogue states and other bad actors.
Yeah, thank you. And David, yeah, please, you want to discuss?
I just want to follow up on Shaimal's great points. And, in addition to the bad actors that I was talking about before, and that Shaimal, mentioned a way to think about, I would say that, from a cognitive neuroscience and neural net point of view, and theoretical neuroscience point of view, and computing point of view, there's no reason why context and nuance and fact versus non-fact and moral values can't be programmed in a pro-social way. To Shaimal's point, you can design them in as well. And it's only a matter of time before that next sort of meta level cognition, if you will, is going to be incorporated. Again, there's a really interesting question about what are the limits and how would we know of what machines are capable of. But this is something that we're going to find out. The other thing that is worth mentioning is brain-computer interface, which is already happening medically for good reasons. But more and more, we want to do closed-loop brain stimulation, where we have electrodes implanted in the brain or some way of modulating the brain non-invasively with electromagnetic fields and so forth. And then we measure what's going on in the brain. We have AI to crunch the big data streams. And then based upon certain algorithms, we feed that back to the stimulator or the modulator to be able to tune the neural networks in our own brain. And the time is coming when that sort of thing is going to be possible, either peripherally or centrally. And so these sorts of things are things that are going to need to be taken into account as well. You can already, as Elon Musk has tried to demonstrate, you can already sort of control behavior of certain animals with certain sorts of implants. And then you start to add AI, and the whole issue of agency and autonomy takes on an even deeper meaning. So those are just some related issues from that vantage point.
David, yeah, and I think Margaret, you want to discuss more? No. Okay, so
No, I'm fine.
Nasli, you. So Francisco, yes, you want to discuss more?
I just want to comment on David's kind of the latest comment. You're probably aware that that an AI system consistently beat other players at the game diplomacy. Have you read that item? And the thing that is interesting about it is that an AI system can detect individual personalities of players and can socially game perception and responses. So that dimension of the ability of AI of interacting with other humans, but also to manipulate behaviors and emotions based on a very accurate interpretation of personality and responses to stress and other things. That is another red zone of artificial intelligence. So thank you for pointing that out, David, because I think the level of considerations that we have put into, for example, regulating advertising and how it's integrated in society, the level of complexity of what AI could do in combination with this education and ability to interact with humans and detect personal behaviors is another great risk. So thank you I just wanted to comment on that specific.
Yeah, Francisco, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, social psychology and social neuroscience has advanced in the last decade and a half tremendously. And then there are age-old ways of manipulating people that have been going on in societies from time immemorial. And so essentially what AI is going to do more and more perfectly is hack our own brains or reverse engineer. And so, I'm less worried about robots becoming human than I am about humans becoming robots.
Yes, wonderful. Yes, Governor. Yes, please. Yes, I hear you already. Yes, please. Simply
to say that this has been an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
It's new to me for the most part, and
But I don't see you. I don't know why we don't see you. Could you?
I don't see that. But I can hear you. You can hear me, so that's important.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So I don't know why I saw you very much. Yes. But maybe you now I don't know. I don't see your image.
Okay, I can hear you and I can see you.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And you can hear me.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Please talk. Yeah.
Anyway, no, I'm just listening, and it sounds to me as if we've bitten off a very large chunk here, and there are lots of issues. We're going to pursue that. We're going to have to deal with them. This is not an easy decision. It's complicated. But that's all I have to say at this point.
Yes.
Really interested.
Yes.
The discussion we've had.
Yes. And I saw one people from that. Okay. So any who want to talk more and discuss more? Yeah. we invite. Oh, yes, we see Governor now. Yes. Yes, yes, I see you now.
I've been hearing most of this, so
Yes, I see you, and
lots to deal with.
yes, and yes, and if so, now I think every people talk and discuss very much already. So thank you so much for your great contribution today, and I think very important. First, Boston Global Forum high-level dialogue on ChatGPT and AI assistance. As you know, a social contract for BAH contributed by Boston Global Forum and World Leadership Alliance Club de Madrid in 2020. We see AI assistance is soon become center power in our society in the future. And we think this is a very important time to think about that framework for regulation, to governance, ChatGPT and AI assistance. We will see more, I think, very near future, a lot of things. And we discussed everything already. So I think two things. One thing that is we try to contribute and try to make it is very helpful for our society. But also we promote and support for innovation. But we need to manage bad side and very dangerous side. So this is the first meeting and discussion very helpful. I think all our contribution today is great, from Wind talk and Sandy talk, and also our speakers here and discussion. And we continue have some important discussion more and meeting more at March 22. We will do online in the morning. On April 4, we will do with government of Japan. April 4, that is in the evening, Boston Thai, and morning Thai in Japan. That is I will send you an all. We hope all of us will join to discuss with leaders of Japan, maybe Prime Minister or at least Minister of Digital Ministry Taro Kono, and also we hope that Prime Minister of Japan will join and discuss as the government discuss high level with Boston Global Forum. At that time, I will come to Tokyo to conduct a meeting with the government of Japan also. Japan is a very close friendship and close relationship with the Boston Global Forum. And then we will discuss with the European Commission and the US government and India government and also Europe Alliance at Zlatko talk, Europe Alliance, yes, and very important pillars for peace and security and also for AI and digital. And we that after this meeting, we will summary our discussion as Governor Michael Dukakis talk, and also every people see that a very complicated issue, but we are very pleasant and happy to do very pioneering for it, and we hope we will contribute for government and the world, and a very meaningful and very significant recommendation for it, and a special do with the United Nations. We close relation and do with United Nations with Amandeep Gill. He is as under Secretary General of United Nations in charge for technology. Yeah, so we will send you frame draft, and we look forward to get your comment modified and add your ideas, and we will hope on April 26 we have very good version and announce, and we will organize in-person conference to announce and discuss at the Harvard Faculty Club. And if you can travel to Harvard, we very welcome to come to Harvard in person and to discuss all of us. And we hope you can contribute, and all of us will co-author for regulation framework for ChatGPT and AI assistance. So one time again, and we are great thank to Governor Michael Dukakis, spend all time with our very important, the first high-level dialogue for it. And after that, and we will also send to government and United Nations our first dialogue today. We will summary and send them, and also send all of you and get your feedback, and we will do by email, and sometimes we can conversation for in person or for email with a small group of people, 2 or 3 people to discuss. Very feel free to join, because a very important, very significant time of the war, and with AI, with many things, and even in the war, Russia and Ukraine, and so this is a historical time. So we hope you will spend time with us and contribute for this significant. Thank you so much again from Boston Global Forum leaders. And also again, today, this is a special event, start event for City 2023. And we are celebrate for 90th birthday Governor Michael Dukakis on November 3. And also congratulations, happy birthday to Professor Tom Peterson, co-founder of Boston Global Forum, and our very dear friends. And thank you so much. So see you on March 22nd, and stay in touch with you. Thank very much, and dear Governor Michael Dukakis. Thank you.